Welcome back to the Tech Coach Corner YouTube series presented by Dyknow. I'm Tiara Lustig, and as always, I'll be your host for today's episode. Today we have a great conversation with Dr. Erik Youngman, and we're talking about deliberate homework. So we're going to talk about what it means, what characteristics it really embodies, and how you can make sure that homework assignments are deliberate and impactful for students in the classroom, or if you're still in a remote hybrid learning setting. Before we jump in, I want to remind everyone to please subscribe to Dynow's YouTube channel, turn on push notifications so that you're getting notified when we drop new episodes, and don't forget to follow us on all of our social channels so that you're keeping up with content that we're dropping on all of our different channels, not just the YouTube channel. I think that's everything that I have to plug today, so without further ado, let's jump into our conversation with Dr. Erik Youngman.
Welcome back to Tech Coach Corner, everyone. I'm Tiara Lustig, your host, and today I am joined by Erik Youngman. Erik, do you want to give a brief introduction to yourself?
Hello, I'm Dr. Erik Youngman. I'm the Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment in Libertyville, Illinois. And I recently wrote a book called 12 Characteristics of Deliberate Homework. So I think that's the topic for today.
It is, yes. Today we'll be talking about deliberate homework. We worked with Erik a lot at Dyknow. He was a guest on our Tackling Tech podcast, as well as a panelist for the Professional Development Summit. And Erik, I know you just wrote that book, 12 Characteristics of Deliberate Homework. So let's dive right in. What is deliberate homework, and what are some examples that you can give?
If we talk about homework, again, I continue to think about it and reflect and connect it with remote learning. So one of the thoughts I recently had, and I'm really trying to connect with educators about, is that remote learning, e-learning, and distant learning are pertinent topics. But we have to remember that homework also focuses on work completion outside of the classroom. So when we're looking for guidance, you can look at homework experts and homework guides to kind of talk through those discussions. Relating to that also, I think a robust homework plan can also guide a remote learning plan. And so I talk about homework, but I really want people to make that connection because they may be thinking that now is not the time to talk about homework. Actually, it's a really good time because it's pertinent to what's going on. The book talks about really just different characteristics of homework, one of them being reasonable. And when we're talking about reasonable, the categories that are under that are completion time, complexity, and frequency. And I think when we're talking about completion time, one of the parts of the book I talk about is really understanding your student population to guide how, when, what, and why you teach. Because we can talk about what's pertinent for homework or for remote learning, but you have to know your students. You have to know the families. You have to know the houses they're going home to. You may want to teach them a lot, but you may have to teach differently because no one is at home to support them. They don't have online access. They have siblings, so they cannot all be on the computer at the same time. So I think that part is really interesting when we're talking about completion time, because you can assign any homework, any remote learning, but you need to be cognizant of how long it's going to take. If people are sharing a device, it's going to take them much longer. If they don't have support, it's going to take them much longer. So I think that's a topic. When we talk about meaningful homework, I talk about the purpose of homework, learning targets, learning mindset, format, and sequence. And one of the topics I've put out recently, again, I don't want to share all of my book in graphics on Twitter, but I am being purposeful because there's a lot of graphics in there. But I think something that's important when we're talking about how does your homework enhance or decrease students' passion for curiosity and learning? Well, when you're talking about purpose, I think you also need to be cognizant of some other purposes. So what's the alignment between your district vision statement and your homework or remote learning practices? What's the purpose for schooling and learning? What are your stakeholder expectations? What are real life connections with family, community, and extracurricular activities? I say that because my daughters and I are actively involved in athletics. If you feel like kids should be actively involved in clubs and activities, you can't give them too much homework. You need to be cognizant of that. What is the purpose of teachers? Are they telling you exactly what to do, or are they trying to inspire students, or are they facilitating? What's the general purpose for homework, and what's the purpose for individual homework assignments? And I think that's just as critical because in general, those are the two guiding points. What's the general purpose of homework or remote learning? But each assignment, if you're sending it because you're saying, I just want to send this home as homework, it's not meaningful. if you analyze each assignment for remote learning or homework, I think that's stronger for the students. The next topic is informative homework. And when I'm talking about informative homework, I talk about communication. And when we're talking about communication, I think it's valuable to think about communicating the purpose, clear directions, and expectations while previewing the homework. Again, very applicable to remote learning. Discussing after guided practice to verify understanding and accuracy of work, to understand questions and clarify expectations. You have to check somehow. When we shift to remote learning, you might be doing an asynchronous lesson that is pre-recorded, but then you may use a synchronous meeting, which is live, to answer some of those questions. And then finally, you need to provide feedback and empower ownership, self-reflection, and goal setting. And I think this ownership and feedback is very critical. Some states are saying don't penalize students for grades. I wrote a dissertation about grading, and I think I really like to emphasize the focus and benefits of feedback. However, if students aren't accountable to participate and aren't doing any work, we need to think through how can we hold them accountable. So I think there are some responsibilities that we can discuss. I think also when we're talking about feedback, we can talk about different types of feedback. So I created a graphic that talks about feedback loops that shift learning. So it's talking about specific, helpful, individualized, forward-thinking, and timely feedback. So I think feedback is very important as we talk through it. And when we talk about feedback, another critical question is, how do students act on teacher feedback about homework, and how do teachers act on feedback they gather from homework? So if it's remote learning or feedback, or remote learning or homework, and I gather those assignments and then just grade it and get rid of it, that's not helpful. We really need to understand what are the students telling us as we're trying to guide future work to continue to help them. I think another question I'm trying to ask teachers, which is kind of similar to that, is what did you learn this week about your students that changed your teaching? I think all teachers should reflect about that. If it's in person, if it's remote learning, or it's homework, again, really trying to understand that student so you can connect with them and differentiate for them. The final section is about grading criteria. And then the last topic is about consistent homework, and it really talks about implementation. And so I think we can ask this same question when we're talking about what belief statements guide consistent homework practices or remote learning. You have to create an implementation plan. And I think as we're talking about that, one way to do that when we're talking about homework is to describe your current practice, establish a plan, gather and evaluate information, define the goal and shared vision, and then create common language. And then finally, you go back to reviewing the feedback, celebrating success, and discussing potential changes. But I think all of these components are helpful when you're talking about homework. All of them are gathering feedback. But again, it really focuses on being deliberate so the students have meaningful, reasonable homework. Those are the two words I keep going back to. If it's not reasonable, it's really not fair. If it's not meaningful, it's not doing any good. And so I think there's been discussions, there's been research about why is homework great, why should we assign it daily, or why should we get rid of it? I try to shift that question to say, when and if you assign homework, let's be meaningful and deliberate and reasonable with that.
Yeah, and I love the reasonable portion of it, especially during remote learning, because I think we're already asking a lot of students on their own, but still, being reasonable with the work that we're giving them, while also, like you said, having a source of accountability and assessment so that they feel motivated and also held accountable for what they should be doing while they're maybe not in the classroom during remote learning. Thank you for that overview of deliberate homework. I will love to read your book, and we will link that down below. 12 Characteristics of Deliberate Homework. It's also on Erik's Twitter. Erik, can you share your Twitter so that people can find you and your book and get more information on that?
I'm active on Twitter. You can find me at Erik_Youngman. It is interesting now as I'm making more national presentations and proposals for those presentations. Now I'm saying deliberate homework and remote learning because there are so many commonalities between those two. Yeah,
they definitely go hand in hand. It'll be interesting to see how that shifts once we go back to, and I don't think we'll go back to normal, but once remote learning kind of phases out a little bit. Thank you for being with us today. We will link your social handles and your book below so that people can find those. But thank you so much for being with us, Erik. We look forward to working with you in the future.